And now I'd like to introduce Martha Hernandez, who is the Director of Policy and Initiatives for Californians Together. Thank you.
Thank you, Gina. And good afternoon, everyone. And so, again, feel free to kind of stand up because we don't have an afternoon break and kind of just take a deep breath. And so this section is going to be focused on identifying promising practices in terms of implementing the EL roadmap. And we will also be spotlighting the web-based resources that are now available. And so I currently serve on the EL roadmap review committee. And this is the group that vets example submissions for possible inclusion on the EL roadmap webpage. And so we will be walking through the process of how a district, a school, can submit a promising practice, an example submission for possible inclusion, and really the district would then become part of the EL roadmap webpage. And so that would be really great. And so as you know, and we were had some time to really dig into the self-assessment rubric. And we know that the rubric can identify areas that need growth, but the rubric can also identify promising practices. And since when a district identifies such a practice that illustrates the EL roadmap vision, mission, and principles, then the district may then submit this to CDE. And so in addition, also, let's see here, in addition to the guidance document that you all received, CDE has also released web-based resources that are available on the EL Roadmap webpage. And these, of course, resources include additional case examples. In the guidance document, you will find case examples. I think there's 4 examples, one for each principles, of each of the principles. But on the web, we have additional examples for districts to review, and the plan is to upload more this year and in the future so that the bank of available resources expands for use in the field. And so web-based resources also include relevant links to research and also includes much of the information that you can find on the guidance document. And so at this time, the department is seeking additional illustrative example submissions. And so we want to continue to, again, as I mentioned, expand that. And we want examples that exemplify the roadmap principles, vision, and mission in action. And so we want submissions that can be replicated and also are inspiring to the field. And so please, we encourage all of you to think about sharing some of these promising practices. The goal, of course, is for the web-based resources to be a living document, a living pool of resources, and it continually evolving as new examples are available. And you would submit, of course, a sample via the CDE, the EL Roadmap webpage, where we will show you there is a example survey where you could upload these examples. And so at this time, let's just kind of take a look at the web-based resources. And so you will see here on the English Learner Roadmap all of the different tabs. You have the policy and the printed document, learning foundations. principles, all 4 principles. The characteristics of examples is a really important web page because this gives districts guidance in terms of examples that CDE is seeking, as well as the EL Roadmap Review Committee. And so this will give you great guidance. And then you can also see that there are resources. And under the resources, there are a variety of documents. For example, the frequently asked questions, the information sheet. There's also the roadmap video that we viewed from Anaheim Union. So that is here available for you to use back in your districts. And there are also a variety of presentations that can be modified for use either with school boards, with your schools, with your leadership teams, and with your community. And so why don't we just take a couple of minutes, if you have your device with you, for you to explore this particular page of the English Learner Roadmap resources. And so we'll give you 2 minutes to explore that on your device. We're really going to be taking kind of a look at, and here Gina has shown that there's case examples, those that appear in the guidance document, and this is where your district's promising practices could appear in the future. In order, if we could go back to the PowerPoint, in order, when submitting a sample, and as I mentioned, there's a page called Characteristics of Examples, and it offers guidance on the kind of examples that CDE is looking for. And so submissions are based on certain criteria that are in agreement with the 3 Castaneda standards. And those standards are, of course, that the practice must be based on sound educational theory and have promise for local impact. The second Castaneda standard is that it must be implemented effectively as determined by local metrics and also as well as adult learning outcomes. And the third is that the practice must prove to have a positive student learning outcome through the lens of continuous improvement. And also something that's very important because we did have submissions that we needed to return because the practice must be primarily targeted at an English learner challenge that a district is addressing. In other words, the practice needs to be focused on data that speaks to the needs of English learners. And so in terms of the standards, again, just to dig a little bit deeper, in the first standard, we talk about research. And we've heard Lori speak about that the EL roadmap is research-based. And so we need to look at the research, and there is a lot of research that we can review. You know, there is the Promising Futures, which is the National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine that was released in February of 2017. The department has a publication that we could also refer to. Also, the Literacy Panel has some research. So it needs to be based on research, but it also, we need to consider the goodness of the fit. Just because it may be effective in other contexts, it needs to make sense for your district, for your student population, for your community, and for the demographics of your school district. And so again, it's not just research-based, but that there is that goodness of fit. Second, in terms of Standard 2 and monitoring use of local metrics, we're kind of talking about adult learning outcomes. And we're really talking about Principle 3 of the EL roadmap because we're talking about adult learning outcomes. And this means that the practice should be implemented with clear leadership and shared responsibility for English learners. And there needs to be leadership that speaks to resource allocation, to expanding capacity of staff, providing professional development that is active, that's based on content, et cetera, that is focused on engagement of English learners. And so again, a continuous improvement model should be evident, and leadership is very important. In terms of monitoring using local metrics of student learning support, we need to be looking at things like the learning climate, of course, the intellectual quality of instruction, but also access, scaffolding, differentiation, and also we want to be mindful of social emotional climate. So it includes all of those learning supports, which are primarily principle one of the roadmap. And then, of course, the last one, evidence of student learning outcomes. Of course, it's really important to examine data, but it's very important to examine disaggregated data, and that we need to be looking at the different topologies of English learners when we are looking at student learning outcomes. You know, now we're looking at a combined English learner, classified learner, but we need to disaggregate so we can see how are the long-term English learners doing, how are the newcomers doing, what about the English learners who are making normative progress, and then really taking a look at the English learner only group and see how they're doing. And we can't forget that we still have to monitor the progress of our reclassified students. So it's looking at data, and then kind of looking at our student learning outcomes. So the EL Roadmap Review Committee created a vetting tool that's really kind of based on these standards, and along with the rubric, we used both. And so the vetting tool is in this section. There's a copy of it in your binder, and it's basically comprised of questions related to the standards that determine if the practice that is submitted is aligned to the criteria, and then to what degree. And so we're going to be asking you to take this vetting tool, because we're going to do some practical exploration with it. And then, of course, there's a second copy of the self-reflection rubric. And together, these two kind of help determine whether a submission to CDE will be posted on the EL Roadmap webpage. And so you will be using these two tools, and you'll have the opportunity to work at your table to evaluate the submissions. These are two actual submissions. So these were actually submitted to the department. And so you will be vetting these, and you will be considering the following questions. When you look at this particular example, you will be thinking about and discussing and determining which principles of the roadmap are evident. And we're looking for each example to be addressing at least two of the principles and, of course, the elements. Is there an evidence, but does this address a meaningful and important challenge and need for English learners? Because there are strategies that are good for all learners, and of course, English learners do benefit, but we're looking at specifically a strategy or promising practice targeted to English learners. And then, is there an evidence base? Cost another standard number one. Is there investment in implementation? Cost another standard number two. And is there evidence of impact? And of course, that's standard three. We also want you to discuss what kind of information do you need from a write-up from the web-based resource to be useful to you in your position, in your district, in your schools. And so again, you are going to take one of the examples and we're hoping that you get to do 2. You have 15 minutes for this activity, so 7 minutes each. And I do have to say that afterwards we will be doing a whole group share, so you can kind of share what your thinking is about these 2 particular case examples. Okay, so you have 15 minutes, and the time begins now. Are there any questions? The vetting tool, the rubric, and the example. So these are 2 examples, actual examples, and so first of all, just kind of sharing out some takeaways based on your analysis. Which of the roadmap principles or elements were evident in the example that you read? And how could the submitter improve this example to make it align more clearly with the EL roadmap? And so do we have any tables that are willing to share their thoughts about one of their example submissions? Did you see the EL roadmap principles or elements? Okay, thank you, Cynthia. So would you please share your thoughts?
Well, the easy one to us, in the bad sense, was ocean waves, because it met none of the criteria at all. We had no questions except what the waves were like, because it looked as if what they had done was hire some language specialist counselors, which is great, who told the students that they should advocate for themselves, and also told the DLAC the same thing. And I don't even think there's anything to ask. There's no research, there's no evidence base, there's no implementation.
So what's the first step that you would communicate with the district in order to improve their submission?
Try again.
Okay.
They need a program. They need to be clear what their program is.
Okay.
They need to be clear what the purpose of these, presumably the counselors are not to create the program, but to help implementation. Exactly what it is that they expect those counselors to do.
So we had a great example of what not to submit. Okay, yes. Thank you. That was ocean waves. Okay, do we have another table that's willing to share? Can maybe share which of the principles or elements were evident? Would you recommend that this be included on the EL roadmap page in order for other districts to replicate that strategy? Yes.
So I basically have a question regarding motivation. I want to be able to motivate our districts to submit, and this seems like it's a pretty rigorous tool, and it would take some time and some thought, maybe a small team to put together. So the ones that have submitted, the districts that have, or schools that have submitted, what have they used as a motivation? How have they used this sort of showcasing of their case as a way to improve, to highlight themselves, or to be recognized for that work? Do the CDE or the EL Roadmap Committee provide like a certification or something that says congratulations, that they could submit to the board or something like that, just like motivation?
Well, that would be a really good idea. The motivation is that we really are encouraging you, those of you in this room, if you know of a promising practice, to really encourage a district to submit it and become part of the movement of implementing the EL roadmap and come down in history for helping to fully implement this throughout California. But that is something that perhaps there could be some recognition from the department to the district in the form of a certificate or some kind of other acknowledgement. I think the department would be happy to do that. So thank you for bringing that up. You're saying, why in the world would a district want to go through all this work to submit a promising practice? But I think a lot of districts may be doing some really great work, and they want to share it with others. And something that we want to say is that we understand, the review committee understands, that districts may be at the beginning stages of implementation because the EL roadmap hasn't been implemented for that long. And so you would need to note, of course, whether you're at the emerging, expanding, or bridging level of implementing this particular practice in order, and you can be at the emerging and just state that. We're just beginning, but this is the research and this is looking very hopeful for us. Any other comments or any other sharing that any table wants to do? Yes, thank you, Alicia.
Marta, as we walk through the process, one of the things that's coming to mind is I think the submission piece is secondary. That's kind of a reflection of the great work to the broader public. But maybe this process can also kind of be thought of as an opportunity for reflection on our existing practices. So within our district, what are we doing? What are we doing that can be kind of not only an asset to our district, but an asset to other districts surrounding us as well? So almost an opportunity for reflection.
And lessons learned.
And lessons learned, and then the share out. But maybe coming at it from a perspective of reflection first.
Exactly. And let's just say that you are at the emerging stages. Other districts could, kind of call and network with that district to say, okay, let us know, how did it go? What would you avoid? What would you have done instead? And so there can be some networking between the districts. And that's what we're hoping. Because remember, there's no right answer. And some of these strategies would have to be adapted depending on the district context. We all know there are no silver bullets. So you can't pick up something that was done in one district and then think that it's going to be implemented in the same way and be as effective, as another district. So again, we're all learning together. Any other comments?
There was conversation in our group that Ocean Waves, they did have a goal. They were trying to move students to reclassification, which perhaps may be a little misguided, but maybe feedback to them about, okay, this is a start. You're looking at reclassification, but we want to look at, college and career readiness. So you want to push them to another level, because I would hate to feel like they'd be discouraged because put themselves out there, right? And they set a goal. Just maybe a little misguided. Maybe they need a little more feedback.
Each of the submissions does receive some feedback, and they do receive some guidance in terms of what could make it a stronger submission, and that we hope they resubmit it with some more reflection. But you're right. They're trying to do the right thing. And so. Well, first, I think they need to look at data, okay, and then they need to look at the research, and I think that would be probably a good beginning for them, is that exploration of looking at the research of what works and what doesn't work. They're at that step one. Any other comments about these? It's our hope that by looking at actual submissions, it gives you kind of a good, sense of, what's expected and what it would look like, or maybe, this kind of gave you what it doesn't look like, but what it looks like when the EL roadmap is really enacted. And so hopefully we really do encourage districts to submit their promising practices. And so we have a comment in the back.
Actually, a question. I heard you mention data review as one of the ways a district could begin. Is data review part of what the CDE will look at when a district, if and when a district submits a roadmap? Are you really just looking at the plan? Or would there be a review of their data to see that there had been some implementation of a plan that had resulted in better practice or better outcomes for students?
At this time, we haven't really done a data review. We kind of accept what we've received as kind of the data, but we maybe could provide some guidance in terms of, in looking at your data, maybe this is a place to begin, but we haven't done that at this time. But thank you, that's that's something to think about. Okay, so I'm going to continue. And so just to let you know that this is the same process that the review committee goes through when we are vetting submissions. And so we want to take you through the web-based resources, or really I want to show you the example survey. So if you look, the English Learner Roadmap Example Survey, this is what it looks like when you are submitting a possible promising practice, or what we call an illustrative case example. And so you can see that, of course, we want identifying information, and we also want the contact of the person that is submitting and that can answer questions. Then you have to determine and be able to check which of the principles and elements are being addressed. And we're hoping that when a district or a school does submit, that it's at least two of the principles. And then, as you can see, when you do choose a principle, the elements do populate, and so you would be able to really target which specific element you are addressing. And so you can kind of see that that happens. And then just a description of the practice and the community served. And here we would want to have enough information that another district could maybe replicate, or have enough information to say, you know, I want to give that particular district a call to find out a little bit more. And so we would really want some detail here. And again, it needs to be focused on English learners. We want, of course, the impact and evidence, so we want some data of effectiveness, and then just kind of a description of how the example illustrates the principles and the elements, and then just describe some of the research or the theory that your promising practice is based. And then if you have tools or resources, it would be great so that districts can kind of look and see. We'd want to have any web pages that you visited and used so that the district can do further exploration. And then any lessons that you have learned as you are really implementing the practice. And then again, here you have, where are you? Are you at the beginning, intermediate or higher level in terms of implementation, emerging, expanding, or bridging? And we would be expecting at this moment in time to have a lot of emerging. And then the type of district, because that's important. You all know that teachers want to know, is this practice effective with the students that I'm serving? So, if you're a rural district, you want to kind of look at rural districts, even though there are strategies that can be used across across all of the context. Then describing the demographics and, just whether the practice addresses the needs of the learning community, and then the grade spans. And so this is what you would do. You print a copy and then you submit it. And then again, the review committee would either recommend it or provide guidance and suggestions for how to improve it, and really look forward to the resubmittal of the improved submission. So that's what it takes, and we really, again, highly encourage all of you to submit a promising practice, what we call illustrative case example. And we also want to let you know that the EL Roadmap Review Committee, we do meet as needed to calibrate. We look at these and we kind of do them together and we calibrate. But a lot of the work is done remotely, and we're really interested in expanding our committee because we're expecting lots of submissions. So if you would like to serve on the committee, you would just need to contact our very own CDE, Gina Garcia-Smith, at EL Roadmap Project at cde.ca.gov. And so are there any questions about these promising practices or illustrative case examples? and we hope to see yours soon. So at this time, I want to welcome and introduce Joanne Lauer, and she comes from Riverside County of Education, and she is going to be talking about taking action and implementing the EAL roadmap. So Joanne, it's all yours.
Woo.